My name is Mark Hunter, I'm your facilitator. This evening, my claim to fame, well, I exist and that's a good start. I've worked with ECIA beforehand. I was a school principal for 35 years. I was on the State Disability Council for a number of years before we had a difference of opinion. You know, things happen. I'm now CEO of Hopewell Hospice Services, Inc., which has two arms to it, one of which is an end-of-life facility. And let me tell you what an awesome honour it is to work there. But on the other hand, we support kids who suffer grief and loss. So that's my summary in a very, very short time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this forum. This forum has a specific process, but before I begin, can I take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional custodians of our land? I would also like to introduce our two interpreters, Danielle, who's there at the moment, and Marty. They'll be playing tag team to support those in the audience who have a hearing impairment. Now, please, ladies and gentlemen, mobile phones either on silent or stun or something. And if my second wife happens to call you, please tell her I'm busy. We are videoing this evening, and the video will go on the ECIA website, and it will also go on YouTube. The format for this evening is that we will have a series of speakers. They will come up, use the lectern or whatever they want to use, and then we'll go through those speakers, at the end of which we'll have three of the four speakers up here and another guest, and I'll introduce that person when she comes up. Jean, who is here from Acting Executive Director, will not be part of the panel. What she wants is this focus to be on NDIS rather than issues of education. However, I do have an email address for those of you who might like to email questions to Jean or her department for answering. And that is det.ndis@dete.qld.gov.au. I'm repeating that, det.ndis@dete.qld.gov.au. Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. We have our first speaker this evening is Trish Hanna. Now, Trish, there you are. Trish has worked in the field of early childhood for 38 years, working in many different parts of the sector: preschool, long day care, family day care, child protection, disability services, and adult education at TAFE and University. She's a strong advocate for the participation and inclusion of children with a disability in their community, in particular, inclusion in childcare settings. In 2014, Trish established services for SDN Children's Services in the ACT trial site of the NDIS, and is currently managing the transition to NDIS in the Nepean Blue Mountains, as well as, when in her spare time, establishing services in southwest Sydney for Life Start Cooperative. Nothing else to do, Trish. In her advocacy, she is president of the National Council of Early Childhood Intervention Australia and has participated in a number of expert advisory groups at state and national levels. So, ladies and gentlemen, for our first speaker, would you please join with me in welcoming Trish Hanna.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you, everybody. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to elders past and present, and welcome any Aboriginal people who are here today. I think I need to cross out the 38 years in working because I'm starting to feel a little bit old. That's quite a long time, but I'm also very proud of the fact that I have worked in a diverse range of settings throughout my career. So I am an early childhood teacher by trade. That was That was my core business 38 years ago. So coming to Queensland, I feel very comfortable talking to a room where I know there are a substantial number of early childhood specialist teachers. So thank you to Katie. Where's Katie? And the ECIA Queensland chapter for inviting myself, and also Margie Otapi, who is the National Chief Executive of ECIA. Margie, just put your hand up and wave to participate in this. So just the fact that there are so many of you here tonight in the room is a testament to the fact that you have keen interest in what's happening in the NDIS world in Queensland. So I think it's important that I explain to you ECIA, who we are and the role that we play. ECIA actually started in 1981 in New South Wales, and it was called the Association for Early Intervention Australia, and it was started by teachers working in early intervention units or in community settings. And then in 1984 it started in Victoria, and then it rolled out into other states and territories, and in Queensland in 1992. The National Council commenced in 1994. So we started out as quite disparate little committees across each state and territory, all focused on the same thing, which was the best outcomes for children with disability in communities. But we didn't work closely together. Every 2 years we'd come together for a conference and we'd have a good yarn, share some stories, celebrate the work we'd been doing. In between, if there was a government policy that we felt we should influence or state the position of children with disability, we would all circulate a document and get something off to the government, the relevant government department, but we're all voluntary. What's happened since that time, since 1981, is that in New South Wales and in Victoria, the state governments have invested substantially in Early Childhood Intervention Australia to ensure that the work of this organisation could go where it needed to go, which was to support the professionals like yourselves working with young children with disability or developmental delay in families. That enabled us to employ staff, which has taken a huge weight off the shoulders of all the volunteers. Although I'd have to say, since stepping into the role of president in January this year, it really is a full-time other job, Mark. So there's my spare time gone. No such thing as spare time anymore. But I enjoy it. It's something that I do quite willingly and happily. So in the last national conference that we had was in 2014 in this very conference centre. Has anybody in the room attended that conference? A few of you? Not many of you? So ironically, the name of that conference, okay, those of you who were here, can anybody put their hand up and tell me what the name of the conference was? Not the committee, because I've reminded you of that. You facilitated it, so anybody got any idea? It was 2 years ago, so it's okay if you don't remember. I had to look it up to actually check the exact wording, but it was called Riding the Wave, Navigating the Tide of Change. And what wasn't written, but it was in an NDIS world. So 2 years ago, we were talking about all this stuff in these rooms here at this conference centre. And I reflected on that and thought, well, we were talking about it then here. Why are we worried about it now? Because let's face it, we're all worried. I worry about it. I tell Peter and Vanessa that I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with ideas floating around in my head. So what hasn't happened in the past 2 years? And I think what hasn't happened is that we haven't kept the conversation going, and that's ECIA's responsibility. So it's not the fault of the Queensland Committee, who are all volunteers as well, who work day jobs. But we do have to take some responsibility at a national level for the fact that Queensland the system or the service system in Queensland is quite different to New South Wales or Victoria or ACT, and the people, you people working with children and families with disability need to have the continuing conversation to understand what the change in practice might look like. What does working with children in natural settings mean? What does following the family's choices, access, participation, inclusion, all of these words, if you go back to the Queensland website and look up the conference, all of this language was in the description of the conference. So we were talking about it then, but we haven't continued the conversation. And part of the reason for that is that ECIA has been spread out in its own little chapter in each state or territory, quite isolated really, reliant on state or government, state government funding to do the work of advocacy in their local state area. But we haven't really come together as a united voice. So I'm here to tell you tonight that 2 weeks ago the National Council met in Sydney for a strategic planning meeting, and we developed a vision and a mission, you know, value proposition. There's a whole range of words used these days to describe it. But from that flowed a conversation that led us to a unanimous vote to become a single entity. So that means all the amazing resources that have been developed in other states and territories can be shared right across Australia. That there will be one voice of advocacy for the professionals working with young children with developmental delay and disability. So I want to share with you, now nobody else has seen this yet because it's still in draft and hasn't actually got draft written on it, but so you're seeing it for the first time. So this is the hand on heart statement that we all came up with and we didn't want to let go of. So the National Council, I should let you know, consists of 2 representatives from states and territories right across Australia. So every state and territory is represented sitting around the table, all talking about currently the NDIS. And we all wanted to keep this, although it's, somebody said motherhood, but we liked it. Young children with disability and developmental delay will fully participate in family and community life in Australia. So that's what we want to see happen. So this is draft. Early childhood intervention is the peak body for early childhood intervention in Australia, representing professionals and organisations that provide services and supports for young children with disability and or developmental delay and their families. So that's who we are and why we exist. Our vision is to be the leading authority in early childhood intervention in Australia. I think we're already that, aren't we? Peter? Vanessa? Margie? We're already that. Our mission is to lead and strengthen the ECI sector through influencing national policy and promoting contemporary best practice to ensure that practitioners and service providers are able to best support young children with disability and or developmental delay and their families. And it's that last part that we haven't done in a very cohesive way over the last 2 years. But I can reassure you that it's changing, and we have submitted to the federal government for funds to support the development of the workforce here in Queensland, but also in other states and territories. We also will be approaching the local authorities here in Queensland for their investment in the workforce to help people understand the possibilities and opportunities that are available to them in an NDIS market, for want of a better word. So one of the key things that ECIA did with federal funding recently was travel all around the country and have consultations to develop the best practice guidelines. And these guidelines were launched in February this year, and they'll be used to develop standards of practice to ensure that the ongoing work with young children is going to be safeguarded, so that organisations will need to demonstrate that they can meet these standards. That was a huge job of work, and it wouldn't have been possible without the collaboration of a national entity. So we know that as a national council we can do this. We do need to seek ongoing funding so that we can continue project work in each state and territory. But I want to reassure you that ECIA will be visible in Queensland, not just through the voluntary efforts of the Queensland Committee, but when we get some additional funding, we will be doing project work and sharing the resources that have been developed in other states and territories. Thanks everybody, and I'll pass over to Peter.
Thank you very much, Trish. Skip your slide. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce our next speaker, Peter Denatris, who is currently the Strategic Advisor to the National Disability Insurance Agency, NDIA. His focus is on early childhood and early education, the school years, and employment for NDIS participants. Prior to this, he had 12 years with ageing, disability and home care in New South Wales as Regional Director in Southern New South Wales. In his current role with the NDIA, he is focusing on key areas of scheme design which recognise the shift from the current program-based systems to an insurance scheme based on markets that need to be developed and supported so that best practice can be enabled and continuous improvement encouraged. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in welcoming our next speaker, Peter.
Thanks, Mark, and if I can echo your sentiments and Trish's and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and their elders past and present that we meet today, and acknowledge Reconciliation Week. It was a very important time. So I want to talk a little bit about early childhood intervention design in the NDIS and why we're going down the path we're going down. And probably challenge all of you here tonight as to, leaving you with some very clear challenges for everyone, not just the NDIA. It's challenges, for professionals, for system stewards, even for parents. It challenges them to think about what's possible rather than where we've come from, and to open your mind to the possibilities of what that might mean if you believe that the National Disability Insurance Scheme is long overdue for people with disability in Australia. And it's very, very challenging in the early childhood years because the insurance scheme is exactly that, an insurance scheme that is driven by evidence, research and science. And you cannot get a richer evidence base in any part of disability in Australia than in early childhood. Australia should be very proud of its connections internationally around what it has led in early childhood intervention, the research, the evaluation, the control studies, and indeed the evidence that has been developed over the last 30 years that gives us a very strong starting point for the insurance scheme to think about design. And we also had the value of the trial. 3 years in South Australia taught the agency a real lot about what you could do better, how you could better and more respectfully support children and their families in an insurance scheme to get the outcomes that the evidence and science expects us to deliver through good early childhood intervention practice. So all of those things mean you have to start to think about how you can do that in an insurance scheme that is driven by markets. Markets that, exist quite strongly in some parts of Australia, but in other parts of Australia still have to form. So it has to be done in a way that also allows you to transition to that over a period of time. You can't think you will get there in 5 minutes. You have to try to imagine how you will transition without losing sight of what you're trying to achieve. That respectful response by the insurance scheme to parents of young children with delay, a developmental delay or disability. So now I've got to find my slides and take you through a few of them. And I will stop and pause on some of them to talk about what's happening in design for early childhood intervention in the scheme as they relate to the slides that are here. But before I do that, I think it'd be, you know, timely to remind ourselves of how fantastic this is. What a unique opportunity this country has to redefine early childhood intervention investment in a way that delivers the outcomes that the evidence and science promises. But that's not easy, because there's a lot of forces there that, you know, are both historical or also in the context of how markets form, about how you get those responses. So the design I'm talking to you about will take many, many years to mature. It won't arrive in 5 minutes, and we will have to water and nurture and feed it and grow it as we go along. So I thought it'd be timely to remind ourselves of what's different. And I think this is, you know, probably some key challenges in the design. You know, previously we had ration systems that had very clear eligibility to get into them. Often that eligibility threshold was very, very high. And there were massive service gaps in all states and territories around early childhood because it was a ration system. It was never funded fully. If you believe the Productivity Commission report, it was based on 2021, you know, projections. $22 billion means that absolute supply will be met by absolute demand. It's a huge reinvestment in, you know, what I would call the science that underpins disability delivery in the early childhood years. Therefore, it's incumbent on the NDIA to make sure the design allows that to prosper, rather than just have market forces delivering input-focused activity. We need to look at the outcomes. The access criteria will now be nationally consistent. The choice and control will mainly be put in the hands of parents or key decision makers of children. Now, I talked before about a respectful, a respectful NDIS. A respectful NDIS doesn't say to a very young family who has a child where they've probably, you know, probably very excited about having the child, and then they're told there's something, you know, some form of inquiry that needs to go on. And I've talked to thousands of parents who have said to me, it's not an easy time to know what to do. It's actually quite a difficult and emotional time. Dad sometimes gets quite angry, mum gets a fog over and can't make a decision, you know, and without the respectful sort of response, which isn't fronting up to a National Disability Insurance Agency office and going through a planning process. It's a bit more than that. It has to look more like, how do you build those very, very important elements that are clearly in the best practice literature, that say, you know, they need to be respectfully given information, build some trusting relationships with some professionals to help them guide through what's possible. The professionals need to be guided by the best practice evidence and science around what outcomes should be expected from what interventions. And the plans should focus on very clearly the development of the child, of the family, parent, carer, sibling relationships, and on inclusion. It should not just look at inputs, whether they be therapies or educators or some other such supports. It needs to look at a holistic part of the child. So respectful, in my mind, is that you are not fronting up to a 1 hour conversation and sent on your way with, you know, precious little information about, you know, what will I pick and why will I pick it. It's about actually a very clearly respectful interaction with professionals that can guide and give parents the right information so that when they leave that transaction, they are well equipped or better equipped to make those decisions. So choice and control in the very early years had to be rethought in the design because, you know, we sort of started off with the old 0 to 65 thinking rather than the life stages thinking. So we're really starting to put some energy into saying, how do you build that respectful experience for the child and the child's parents. The levels of assistance were capped. Here it's demand driven. So in other words, people with disability get the support they need. Now, this is really a very rich part for the NDIS through the actuarial function to think through, because in the scheme, which is driven very much by the National Disability Insurance Scheme Act, there's some very clear guidance about what the agency through the scheme can fund and not fund. And one of the key parts of that in early intervention is that you should only fund things where you are reasonably satisfied that there's an evidence base that it will deliver the right outcomes for the child or the participant, and indeed benefit the scheme over the life course. So in other words, there's an outcome that is measurable, that is quite discernible, and leaves the child and their family in a better place than when the intervention started. So there's a strong science behind that, a real strong science. And maybe in early trial, we didn't quite hold the scheme design to that science. So we're now redressing that and clearly looking at making sure that what we fund delivers what's intended by the science. The last one is funding. As I said, it's fully funded. So I like to use the mantra here that, you know, we're going to go through a fairly hectic time over the next 3 years, and I'll show you that pictorially in a moment. But over the next 3 years, it's probably going to be more about transition to the NDIS rather than the outcomes that we want from a fully mature NDIS. But we will get there in time where we'll return back to the science and we will have this fully funded as was intended. So these dot points just say where we're up to. The third one, please now have Northern Territory in the tent, and Western Australia is the only one yet to sign up. And that'll come in time, I'm sure. And, you know, a lot of people get very critical of Western Australia, but I actually think, you know, they're holding out for some very good reasons. They were, you know, they were the forerunners in the LAC type approach, and they have a strong investment in that very community integrated disability system. So they want to see it right. I think, down the bottom I've led you to the NDIS website, but it's important that you stay in touch with that because it does move quite quickly and it is quite rapid in the information that gets put up. So if you're not staying abreast of it or you're waiting for the next conference like this, a lot of water will pass under the bridge before you sort of catch up with what the decisions that are made. So look, there's three key pillars that underpin the NDIS. There's the insurance approach. I've talked a little bit about choice and control and about that respectfulness that we need to build into design. But there's another important part, there's community and mainstream, and this is the part that everyone needs to take responsibility for, every Australian. This is not about paying for things for people with disability that they should reasonably expect as a citizen of Australia and a resident of a state and territory, and we know that that's not the case currently. Community and mainstream is about people with disability having citizenship, having active valued participation, and the biggest challenge for the scheme here is employment for people with disability. If we think about the journey of disability in Australia, you could probably say, yep, through the 90s we fought the sort of inclusion in the education system. You know, we've probably got a way to go there. We're probably not getting the outcomes we want fully from the education system yet, but you could sort of tick the box that there's a strong acceptance that people with disability, students with disability, should attend school and should be given the opportunities that other Australian citizens are given. But the next one is employment. It's a huge gap. And, I will not criticise, but I'm certainly very, very cognisant of some of the barriers that people with disability face just from the structural systems that they have to go through for employment. The insurance approach is an interesting one, and that's because this is the hardest for people to grasp from a point of view of how this will be managed. The insurance approach means you must have a discipline that says, you fund reasonable and necessary supports due to functional impact of disability. That's the wording in the legislation and that's the theory behind it. This is the emerging science that we are going through. Everyone wants to rush there and think we can refine this and get it right in 5 minutes. It will take more learning, but it's very important in the early childhood, early intervention years because we have a science and evidence base that we should be taking, very, very close paying very close attention to look at that design of reasonable and necessary. Because often in the early childhood years, the early childhood dollar has seeped into what community and mainstream should be doing, right? So we have to blend the two to make sure the insurance approach and community mainstream are working well together. And that will take time again, take quite a bit of time. But, you know, we would hope that through the planning process and the design I'm going to take you through now, we will start to strengthen that as we move towards the NDIS and as we go, you know, more and more to a mature and better understood NDIS. So this is what we did over the last 3 years in trial. You can see the states down the bottom. We've done a little bit in Queensland, not a lot up in Townsville, but we're moving along. But as you can see, you know, about 27,000 people by the end of trial will be in the NDIS. Very impressive, I thought, until I looked at this slide. This is what we're going to do in the next 3 years. Okay. So you can see when I say we are transitioning to the NDIS, I mean that, you know, we are taking all the state and territory funded systems and taking them into one nationally consistent scheme. But, you know, we'll be very, very busy with first plans and transitioning people in, you know, trying to do that in a respectful and supported way. So we may not quite get everything right in the first 3 years as we move into that. However, we will try damn hard in early childhood intervention in the early years to make sure that we are building it as close to what was intended in the design that I'll take you through now. And that's important because early childhood intervention and the early childhood early intervention design has two very, very simple but key concepts in it. One was respectfulness, but the other one was early. No waiting. No waiting. Early intervention is underpinned by the fact that when something's detected, you need to respond in a very measured, but in also a very timely way. If you're going to deliver the benefit that is evidenced by the science, you must do that at a time that then delivers, you know, the greatest outcome for the child. Don't know how many of you know the eminent Dr. Tim Moore. These are his words, not mine. He works for the Murdoch Institute down in the Royal Children's Hospital down in Victoria. Wonderful practitioner and researcher in early childhood development and in early childhood intervention. This is how he describes what the aim of early childhood intervention is. You know, you can read through that, but if you read the sort of third last line, children gain and use functional skills. They need to participate meaningfully in the key environments in their lives. So best practice here is enormously challenging, and Trish spoke about ECIA's role in that, and certainly that has been a journey that we've been on in New South Wales and Victoria for quite a while, to try and provide the impetus for the sector to be able to practice that inclusive early childhood intervention that you're after. And it's really, really important that the scheme then designs to allow that to continue and not take it backwards. The concept being that if you're going to have best practice, family-centred practice all around Australia, you've got a design that promotes that. The best people to demand that are the decision makers of the child. The parents, the carers, etc., etc. So if they're not armed with the information of what it is that their child would best gain for the outcomes that they're stated, you know, we're not really allowing that best practice to flourish. Most people said, why don't you, you know, Peter, why don't you just make rules, and why don't you just, you know, regulate, and why don't you do these sorts of things in design? The insurance scheme is predicated on markets. Markets are predicated on the fact that the people who are spending in those markets have choice. So you've got to make that a respectful choice. It will be the participant that demands best practice and the outcomes, not anything that government does in regulation or mandating different approaches. But you also need to put in co-strategies to promote that, and that's the work you do with peaks and the work you do with other organisations that can help disseminate a broad range of capability to systems to do that. And that's the work that I'm sure Trish is really looking forward to nationally. So the key design in early childhood, early intervention is about reasonable and necessary supports. Now I just need to, sorry to do this to you, but I just need to make sure that everyone's very clear about two things here. Reasonable and necessary across the life course can be measured in many ways, but in the Act we have two sections of the Act that are dedicated to access to the scheme. One is Section 24, where a person has a clearly diagnosed or discernible disability that causes functional impact requiring reasonable and necessary supports to have as ordinary a life as possible. But the one that is mainly applied to children is the early intervention Section 25 clause of access to the scheme. And this is where the science becomes important, because it's under that part of entrance to the scheme that you have to say, we have evidence that says we can reasonably and necessarily fund these types of activities because they will bring to benefit these types of outcomes that will benefit the child and benefit the scheme in the long term. So early childhood, early intervention is about Section 25, delivering what the Act asks it to deliver. So reasonable and necessary across both of those. So a lot of people see reasonable and necessary as a bit static, I think, but it should be actually quite a dynamic part of the NDIS around what you're trying to deliver for the participant. The key design is that it's not only about children with disability, it's about developmental delay. That's causing us a little bit of, sort of time to pause and think through how we best make sure that's done the right way. Developmental delay is difficult for an insurance scheme because it's not, clearly measurable by some diagnosis and functional screening tools. And so we have to think through how we communicate about the thresholds of developmental delay around where the scheme, cuts in reasonable and necessary. But then we want the scheme to be generous. We want it to be generous, so the idea of, saying yes or no probably doesn't cut it from that generosity point of view. So the generosity has to be, if it says no, that doesn't mean that there's not some form of continued sort of guidance and support over a period of time so that the scheme is assisting as many children as possible that have some form of impact through developmental delay. That's going to be interesting because we have this other policy framework they call the mainstream interface principles that we have to match that up to. And I won't get into the technicalities of that because you'll probably start throwing things at me, but the bottom line is the scheme needs to interface to make sure that people don't fall through any cracks inadvertently, that it hasn't sort of thought through in the transition. We need it to align with best practice. I've already alluded to that. We want to make sure that the research and the evidence guides what we do in early childhood intervention. We're going to engage access partners, although we've dropped the word access now, we're just going to have community partners who will assist us to do this. And a lot of people have said, well, why is that in the design feature? There's lots and lots of reasons, but the two I'll state to you this evening are that the agency will never have the skills base to apply the science properly. We are at full scheme only 7% of the total spend of the scheme. That's a pretty lean agency. And, these types of skills shouldn't be, these types of skills and this type of workforce shouldn't be replicated either. We need an efficient use of how the agency thinks about who it partners with in this space. So you shouldn't have, teams of professionals and allied health professionals, clinicians and teachers in the agency doing what can be done once very, very well in the market. So our partners, early childhood, early intervention partners, will do a lot of this work for the agency. The last part is that good early childhood intervention supports integrated in context and with natural environments. So we are going to push the family-centred best practice guidelines as part of the ECEI partnership role that says, you know, if you are going to get the outcomes that the science says you should get for your child, that should also be in a sustainable way so that the child is included wherever possible in all aspects of where all other children live, grow and play. So to finish off, the design was chosen because it's to promote inclusion and promotes early childhood intervention services to work with all key environments of the child. So taking the child into the National Disability Insurance Agency and their family for a planning process is not a natural environment. You need, wherever possible, the expertise, the expertise and the professionals to go to the child's life and assist the family wherever possible. It should provide easy-to-reach supports for children and their families. So the idea of the partners is that, you know, most systems, I don't know if it's escaped your attention or not, but most systems build the really specialist parts of, you know, their service offerings right at the back and make them the hardest to get to. What this needs to do is bring some of that to the front, and where a child needs a little bit of expertise, a little bit of, you know, clinical input, that is easy to reach. It isn't, you know, something that you have to go through massive hoops to get. So it needs to make sure it's easy to reach and gives the families useful information. The NDIA will partner with the appropriate organisations, I've said, and the focus needs to be on quality. It needs to move away from just activity to quality, and certainly promoting quality is what we will work hard with all our partners. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce our next speaker, Jean Smith. Jean is the Acting Executive Director, Student Wellbeing and Support. She was an early childhood educator and trained as an early intervention teacher. She subsequently managed the specialist education services at a national, regional and district level within New Zealand during a 20-year period. She then saw the light and moved to Queensland 4 years ago. In 2014 and 15, she was Director NDIS Implementation for DET and developed the first department-wide implementation plan. She now manages NDIS policy and implementation, student wellbeing and mental health, student behaviour and inclusion, access and participation. Jean has a lived experience of disability and currently provides daily support for 2 grandchildren with a disability. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join with me in welcoming to the lectern Jean.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to talk to you today. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the Turrbal and Jagera people as the traditional owners of the land where we gather today, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge my team who are here today, and in particular Anna at the front, who is out there on the road going around and talking to people about what we're trying to do in terms of helping a smooth implementation of the NDIS across the scheme. I also would like to acknowledge Prabjot Singh, who is somewhere, over here. Prabjot came to us from communities and has been a fantastic help with the work around NDIS. And Meg Quinn, who can't be with us tonight, she's got family commitments tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge the all of you for turning out here. I think that's just an amazing thing to see so many people out. But this is such an important system change, and you know, as a grandparent of two young children with disability, you know, it's just going to be an amazing change if all of us take our part and all of us do what it's going to take to change our Australian society to be fully inclusive. And, you know, I'm really passionate about that, and the department is passionate about doing our part in making that system work. Because we really do value early intervention. We know the importance of early intervention. We know what a difference it makes to young people, and getting that great start in life, learning those skills makes a big difference to the long-term outcomes for children. So in Queensland, we do have a different system, and we like to claim our difference, but it is going to be different in terms of how we now integrate the system we have with the new demands of the NDIS. And so we're currently providing early intervention for young children with suspected or diagnosed disability who have significant support needs. And we do that prior to their first year of schooling through our early childhood development programs and services, and we call those ECDPs. You know, we've got some fantastic people out there delivering fantastic services, and I just want to acknowledge each one of you who are working in our ECDPs, because you do an amazing job for families. What are we going to do in terms of early intervention and the NDIS? And I might just grab a water. So in 2013, all state and territory governments agreed that early intervention responsibilities for those children with disability and developmental delay would be the responsibility of the NDIS rather than of mainstream services. And the different responsibilities of what education will still do and what the NDIS will do, and other systems like health and transport, etc., are all outlined in the NDIS applied principles. So we've used those principles to try to identify what's the contribution of the Department of Education and Training and how we will work seamlessly with the NDIS. So in line with that responsibility shift, we have the government has made a decision to quarantine the ECDP funding as part of the government's contribution. Now, that was announced at the beginning of this year, and we met with the NDIA prior to the commencement of early launch in North Queensland, and we talked about how we would continue to provide services, and we always intended that there would be an overlap of services, that there would never be a time when a child and their family would be left without support, and that's been an underlying principle for the department. We won't walk away from responsibilities for children. We've been very clear about the no disadvantage to families and children while we're transitioning to the NDIS. As part of that commitment, Anna, as I have said before, who was previously the Director for Disability, has been asked to go out and go around the state and make sure that principals and teachers and all the support staff in schools and parents and other carers know about what is happening in terms of education and gets good, clear information. Through the early launch site, we have identified that we weren't really clear quite what was going to be happening for families, and so we really wanted to address that overwhelming concern by staff and by parents by having Anna out there on the road talking with people. The Minister heard the concerns of families and heard the concerns of educators about the uncertainty that was felt about ECDPs and what would be lost if ECDPs were not to exist. And so the Minister made a commitment that ECDPs will remain fully operational until 2020, 1 year longer than the NDIS transition. At that time, the future arrangements for ECDPs will be reviewed. This will allow us time to see what services are available under the NDIS and also support us to make informed decisions about the long-term requirement for education services to this group of young children. So I want to reiterate that parents can continue to register their children in ECDPs in line with the current eligibility criteria and during this period of transition, and that we will continue to take families into ECDPs. This means that eligible children receiving early intervention services through the ECDPs will receive their ECDP support and their NDIS supports. It's very important that people feel reassured that we are listening to your concerns. We're not unaware of the tension that's there around wanting the best for children and believing that ECDPs do provide a great service for children. So part of what we're doing is talking to people about what are the concerns they have, what are the parts of ECDPs that are really valued. From now this year until 2020, we're going to undertake an independent review. The Minister made that commitment in the last couple of weeks. So that will review the role of ECDPs and will establish as part of that a stakeholder reference or advisory group. And we'll provide the opportunity for parents and staff and other key stakeholders to have a say in terms of that review. We'll also, as part of the review, be doing a study of the outcomes of ECDPs and other early intervention services across the state. And the scope will include areas with and without ECDPs in order that we understand what are the parts of ECDPs that are really valued, what are the parts that may not come under provision from the NDIS. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say that the department is working really closely with the NDIA, with the Office of Early Childhood Education and Care and other agencies, and with the unions. And we're also really keen to be partnering with ECIA. We've met with them today and really appreciate the forum being set up today to provide an opportunity to hear from the various stakeholders. From the start, we've had as one of our principles that the transition of services would be seamless and that no child will be worse off as a result of the introduction of the NDIS. We're committed to that, and we're committed to ensuring that high quality early intervention support is provided right across Queensland so that all children and their families with disability and developmental delay can access it. We're really looking forward to continuing that work and making sure that happens. And we loved the statement up there, and we want to see that young children with disability and developmental delay are able to fully participate in their families, in our education settings and in their communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce Kevin Bates. Kevin is the Queensland Teachers Union President. The QTU is one of the largest and oldest registered industrial organisations in Queensland and represents 43,000 teachers, principals and administrators in Queensland state schools and state TAFE colleges. As a product of Queensland state schools, Kevin is a fierce advocate for public education and the students and teachers it serves so well. Please join with me in welcoming Kevin. Good night.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin, I too wish to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Yagara and Turrbal peoples on whose land we meet, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge and pay respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who've joined us here this evening. Mark, in his introduction, identified that our union has been around for some period of time, 127 years. Our ethos is to promote and protect public education, and I hope that that's the main reason why I'm standing here before you this evening. Because within that simple statement, there's a very powerful message about a role that unions play in the Australian community as a whole. There are many, many situations where trade unions have brought their power and authority to bear through the strength of their membership to ensure that things that are done to the community are done in a way that respects the community and delivers outcomes that are of benefit. It's really important that each and every one of us receives the benefit of the respectful interactions that the NDIA have identified as a part of this NDIS process. And that means that important stakeholders across the education sector and the community as a whole are included in the process of development and transition. And so fundamentally, when our members came to us just a few short months ago and started to identify that there were significant issues for them arising out of the implementation of NDIS, it's entirely appropriate, and in fact, morally, we're bound to take a response to each and every one of those issues. As a trade union, we're founded on principles of democracy. We've been meeting over the last few weeks with members across the length and breadth of the state. So far, in face-to-face meetings and in teleconferences, I've personally spoken with well over 300 people, engaged on a day-to-day basis in early intervention in our school system through the ECDPs. And the messages coming from them have also been strong and unanimous. They value what ECDPs offer. They value their work with you as community members, as parents, but most importantly, they value the work they do with the young people who need the support to ensure that they have the best possible opportunities from education. And so it's with that in mind that I make a number of comments, I guess, about some of the issues that have generated the concerns and also really drive our interaction across the board in this implementation process. I have to say that fundamentally, our union, representing across the nation over 200,000 teachers, principals and school support staff, and with our colleagues in the Independent Education Union, another 70,000 teachers, principals and school support staff, we take the view that marketisation is not in and of itself a positive thing. It is absolutely fundamental that our experience of marketisation, particularly in respect of vocational education and training, we have seen thousands of teachers and tens of thousands of students worse off as a consequence. We cannot come from a position of support in respect of marketisation because our experience across the world is one of negative outcomes for stakeholders and participants. Again, we're duty-bound to influence the processes to ensure that if marketisation is to be implemented, it must be done in a way that is working with people and not being done to people, because that's the only way we can hope to protect the best interests of the whole community. That's a fundamental problem when we talk about an entire philosophy that is founded in the commercialisation and marketisation of services. So we do have some issues, because when we're on the opposite side of the table, right from the very outset, there's got to be a lot of talking, a lot of convincing, and an awful lot of evidence. And I appreciate that one of the things we've heard tonight is it will take years for us to see the full transition to the NDIS. But in reality, there are many things that we know, there are many things from which we can learn at this point in time from international experience, and we call on a whole range of resources and sources of information to ensure that our input is based also on evidence and on the science of education. There's also one basic axiom that we know to be true, and that is that real change is not delivered without the full engagement of all stakeholders. You will not deliver and cannot deliver change in schools without engaging with the people who do the work. And that means the teachers, the teacher aides, and the principals who lead schools, who have to make the fundamental decisions and are bound by our code of ethics to do everything that we do in the best interests of the children that we teach. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute there's any intention to do that. I just want to make it really clear that that means that we do have a place at the table. We do have a voice in the conversations that are happening, just the same as parents, children, and community members should. And it's really important that we're here tonight to stand up before you and have that voice, because it's about recognising the importance of all stakeholders to coming up with the best possible outcome. It's also really important to acknowledge that nothing happens in a vacuum. That the situation that we find here in Queensland means there is no blank slate. We simply can't implement NDIS without recognising that something has gone before it. And so the decisions that are made, the processes that are undertaken, and the model that's being developed has to recognise that there has been an investment over decades in a process that has been a strong support. Whether it can be improved or not is not up for debate. We in education believe that everything that we do can be improved. What we're about is saying that the basic precept that we start from should be there is already something in place. Let's see what we need to do to build on that as a foundation, as opposed to wiping it off the table and starting again. And I think the thing that's come through most strongly to me as a message from parents and community has been that they respect what ECDPs do. They value the contribution that it's made to the success of the lives of their young people, and as a consequence, they certainly don't want to see it swept aside. So in conclusion, it's really, I think, the message to take away from today for me, and hopefully something that I can leave with each of you, is that teachers value and respect the opportunity that's been provided by NDIS. We know because every single teacher in every classroom right across the nation has a day-to-day lived experience of working with young people with disabilities, their parents and caregivers, as we work towards the same goal, which is maximising the opportunities and outcomes for each of those individuals. But as a consequence, we know that the system has dramatically under-resourced and under-delivered for those young people for a very long time. That it has often been teachers, support staff and principals in schools that have had to work closely with parents without the necessary resources to do their best to try and deliver the outcomes that we know the young people deserve. So fundamentally, there is hope that through programs like the NDIS and, dare I say it, Gonski, we can actually deliver outcomes in our education system that will ensure that every child, regardless of their background, regardless of their need, can engage in our education system in a way that ensures that they have the brightest possible future. And I look forward to working with all of you in my best endeavours and the endeavours of the 43,000 members of our union to try and make that a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I'd like to ask our speakers, Trish, Peter and Kevin, to come and join me on the stage, along with Margie Otape, who is the National Acting CEO of ECIA. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome our panellists this evening.
Hello, I'm Vivian. I run Kids Matters Occupational Therapy, which is a large occupational therapy clinic in Brisbane. We are primarily centre-based, but we do go into homes and schools. So I'm very aware that the best practice guidelines are talking about working in naturalistic settings. My concern for that is it's a completely different model, the funding, and there's so many different aspects of that. So question one is, what support is there available for me to consult about getting the best practice model integration? But the second question is that when we talk about naturalistic environments, children with autism especially, have very special needs, and it's the sorts of and will need special equipment. And so if we are trying to only use the equipments in the home, then we are not getting them the best practice that they need. Whereas if we can tailor the clinic environment to what they need, then we can replicate that at home and in school, and we get some really fantastic outcomes. And so when we're talking about evidence-based, you've got the research, you've got the clinical experience, and you've got the parent experience. And we know from 10 years of practice what works. And I'm very concerned if we are hamstrung and told you can only do this in this way, it will really compromise the outcomes for the families and kids.
Thank you. So if I'm to summarise, what you're a deliverer of specialty services, what support is there for you to be able to influence what happens through the NDIS? Is that your first question? I'm going to throw that one to you, Peter.
I thought you might.
Just the starters.
Look, so there's many elements to your question, but I think the two things I would point out is, first of all, the best practice, as I've described it, is about delivering outcomes, and those outcomes will be described in the child's plan, and the parents will understand, through the processes that we want to build around the planning with the partner, that can be obtained in many ways. It's about how they value the practice models that you then put forward, differentiated to others that might be also practicing in the same space. The support that you've got, I think I will leave to Trish or Margie to answer, because I think it's an interesting one. I talked earlier about the insurance approach and the fact that there's markets as part of that, but the best features of early childhood intervention as a system is usually where there's not only competition but collaboration. And the whole best practice model, transdisciplinary approach with a key worker, assumes that a whole range of service providers may be working with one child, but they're doing it in a way that's consistent. Now, the replication's an interesting one. I think, the children on the spectrum, children with autism, there's emerging evidence and science around that. The agency has no view. We're quite agnostic about, centre-based versus some other approaches. However, what we should be aspiring to is for outcomes that include children with autism. So the practice should lead to outcomes of inclusion. And I think that's, where we would say to you, you shouldn't rush to the conclusion that best practice means you can only do it one way. Best practice means that you're taking the best skills and knowledge of your organisation and its skilled practitioners to deliver those outcomes.
Trish, do you want to add anything?
I was going to be cheeky and say join ECIA Queensland. It's only $50 for an annual fee, and soon is it? But that ECIA takes the role of supporting the development of the sector very seriously, and And we're not just talking about teachers here, we're talking about allied health as well. So I work for a service provider in New South Wales, and we employ teachers, speechies, OTs, physios, social workers, psychologists. And ECI organisations generally in New South Wales employ that range. You do get organisations like yours that are specialists in one particular profession, and all of those are members of ECIA in New South Wales ACT, and they all benefit from the sector development work or the resources that we've been developing with our state government funding that we will be sharing with Queensland. Margie, did you want to add to that?
Just to reiterate that we're a broad church in terms of our professional membership, and private practitioners are an important part of that cohort of membership, and some of the recent professional development competency programs that we've run have been working with private practitioners to collaborate in joint service agreements with ECI providers. Now, I absolutely understand the models are different in Queensland, but there's going to be lots of opportunities over the next few years to be talking about innovative practice and to look at ways in which different practitioners can work collaboratively together. So there's some, I think, exciting opportunities in the future to be looking at good practice and to work towards national good practice. I don't think any of us are there yet around Australia in terms of where we're going with that. I think there are many, many good models, but a way to go, and so we're going to be learning, working with practitioners to evolve that practice as well.
Thanks, Margie. Kevin, have you got anything to add? I'll hold your second question to the end if we've still got time. Next question, please. Yes, you had your hand up. Microphone. And it would be good if we could, as a collective, cover as many topics around this agenda as we can. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Alison. I'm from Bundaberg. I'm the mum of a little boy who has Down syndrome, and I'm also a pre-planning consultant working with the YMCA in Bundaberg. So I have two questions, if that's okay. The first is quite a simple one. Children who are currently enrolled with the ECDP, once they become a participant in the NDIS, can they continue to access ECDP services? The answer is yes. Great, that's number one. Thank you.
Yes.
Number two.
Getting good guidance here.
Thank you. Number two, Peter, if you could provide some more clarification around access partners and how that's going to work. That's obviously a different system to how is operating in other states. And so just some clarification around the role of the access partners and what they're actually doing, and how those people or what sort of organisations are likely to be taking on that role of access partner in the community.
Thanks, Alison.
Good, good question, Alison. I think, I'll try and make this as sort of brief and succinct as possible. So if there's anything I miss in your mind, please grab me straight afterwards, and certainly happy to do that. So look, the role of the early childhood early intervention partner is, it is absolutely imperative that we bring the right skills and the right professionals into the conversation as early as possible for the NDIS. And so the role of the partner is actually the first point of contact, if you like, for very young children and their families to be supported by the scheme. The role of the partner is not only to assist the agency in making the access determination. So I'll make this, I like to sort of explain it this way. The agency, through the Act, cannot delegate two functions. One of them is the access determination. So can a person enter the scheme? But they can be assisted by partners to gather the information and to get the types of things that they would be required to make that determination. Yeah, well, see now I've got to think where I am, because the LAC roles are different in each state and territory. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's similar, but it's age appropriate in the early childhood years. So the second part of that is then also if the agency says yes, the other thing the agency can't delegate, if so, how much? What's the value of the reasonable and necessary plan as a response to that? But again, it can take advice from partners to do that. So why wouldn't we be asking the professionals who understand the practice, the evidence and the science as it applies to what's presenting with the child around developmental delay or disability, their opinions on what that looks like? So the agency shouldn't replicate all of that specialisation, it should leverage it. So the partner does those types of functions as well as similar functions of, good early intervention work with families. And when I talked earlier about the concept of generosity, sometimes you may not meet the access determination because the developmental delay doesn't meet the strict criteria, but that doesn't mean it should be an all or nothing proposition. It should be that partner, partner of in early childhood should be able to respond in a number of ways to assist the family on their pathway in life. So that is also about the partner being able to interface in community and in system with all those other systems that are sometimes very hard for families to navigate.
Thank you, Peter. Kevin, anything? No? All right.
I could talk to the cows, come home about ECIA, but probably shouldn't.
You've already promoted membership, Trish.
Can I, Peter? Yeah. The organisation I work for in New South Wales has been part of the pilot of the development of ECEI, and while it is an evolving concept, I'd have to say that the work that we've been able to do, funded through the NDIS as a partner with the NDIS, has been very satisfying. So we're working with all children in the age range of birth to 6 years of age. There are no eligibility criteria to come and work in the space in ECEI with a partner. So you can have a worry about your child and you can have supports immediately from an ECEI partner to help you work out the direction that you need to head in for your child. So that may well be into a community setting. It could even be as simple as supporting the inclusion of that child in a daycare setting. It could be finding a therapist that can provide ongoing supports. So for some children who come into the ECEI approach, they will not need the full scheme. They're in the scheme when they're in the ECEI approach, and they may not need the full scheme ultimately. So there's freedom within this approach to work and be responsive to the individual needs of that child in that family.
Thanks, Trish. Nick. Yes, ma'am. Lady in blue top.
My name's Bronwyn Sutton. I'm a speech pathologist. I have a very small practice. Probably going to get myself into trouble here, but here. In Queensland, a lot of people who, I'm going to talk about therapists now, speech pathologists, occupational therapists, physios, etc., who deliver services for children are in small practices. And I'm very confused about the whole thing, and I consider myself a relatively intelligent person, but I'm getting more confused the more I sit here. My understanding, please tell me if I'm wrong, is that an access partner, which is now called a community partner, is going to be a relatively large organisation. Could I, as a person of 3 or 2 staff, be an access partner? Because, I'll continue, if they are large organisations and they are the people who have the people, I don't know if they are planners, because I'm getting confused between LACs, is it just me? Community partners, planners, and now I heard on Tuesday there's another one called a community support coordinator worker. I don't know, I can't work out who does what. So if these large organisations have the parents coming and then they help the parents go through a lovely planning process and decide what they need, they are also, these large organisations employ their own speech pathologists, occupational therapists, physios, etc. Why would they then refer on to me?
Okay, thanks.
Is there, I'm sorry, but is there an inherent conflict of interest here if the people who are helping support, I don't know, I really hope I'm wrong, but you know, am I right here? Is everybody with me? Are we all a bit confused about... And my fear, I suppose, is that in Brisbane there'll be 5 or 6 or 7 access partners, which are large organisations, yet the bulk of the people, therapists in Queensland, are actually small, sometimes a single person who does a really good job.
So let's see what Peter has. Thank you, Bronwyn. That's yours, Peter.
Thank you, Bronwyn. So let's see if we can clear up some of your confusion. I don't know about the coordination stuff you were talking about and those sorts of things, but I do know. So in the early childhood years, we will have our community partner, our early childhood, early intervention partner, who will undertake the functions as I described to the previous question. I think the best way to explain your assertion as to who can be an access partner is to say to you that in the pilot we did in the Pea Blue Mountains, indeed in the early work we're doing in Townsville, and indeed in the work we're currently doing in South Australia, they are all very different organisations. We have a very small kindergarten that is a partner in the Pea Blue Mountains. That organisation, I think, only employs 3 or 4 people, you know, and they work in a highly collaborative way with both other service organisations and private practitioners. They have to, because that's the response that's required. The second part of your question about how does this fit in to, you know, your conflict of interest assertion, I think that's a very good question, because if I was to sort of give you the metrics of this, which goes something along the lines of that the partnership will only, the access partner, ECEI partner, will only consume about 15% of the resource, i.e. dollars of the NDIS spend at full scheme in early childhood. That means there's still about 85% of that money finding its way out in reasonable and necessary plans of the individual children and their families. So at full scheme, that was, in the Productivity Commission, that was valued at around $850 million per annum in early childhood intervention in Australia. About 15% in the early childhood partnership, and the other 85% still contestable in the market. So, you know, you might want to ask yourself the question whether you want to be in one or the other, because the conflict of interest question still is playing out. But I think it was a good question, and therefore it's incumbent on me to give you the following of where we're up to. There is 2 identified conflicts of interest in this approach, but they are both not of, not of the ilk that you would not go forward and do this in this way, which is, you know, about the participant and their family rather than about the conflict of interest. One of them is exactly that. We know that the best practice in early childhood usually results in a very tight and a very, very emotional bond sometimes between the family and the first practitioner that they work with. You know, they go on a journey through health, and they go on a journey through a range of other systems that often leave them quite shattered rather than quite clear about what they could reasonably expect. And then when they start to get some answers, that manifests in a very strong, trusting relationship that develops. Therefore, it's hard then, if you're the partner, then to then refer on, because they may not want to leave. So we've got to work through how the ECEI partner works in that whole market of the 85% of contestable that we're talking about. And I think the last one, which is one for the agency, is that you also don't want your ECEI partner developing the reasonable necessary plans and then delivering them, because in effect they're writing their own cheque. Yeah. So, you know, you've got to work through those 2 conflicts of interest in a sensible way. And the reason I say sensible is, if you go back to my presentation about, you know, this will take quite a while to get to, you may have to have iterations because markets are not well formed in some parts of Australia around early childhood intervention. So you don't want to inadvertently apply rules that then mean families don't get you know, what they need. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Trish, Kevin?
And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that there are times when in these conversations we have to move on from niceties to some realities. And your question identifies the elephant in the room, which is that in a market that's been valued at $22 billion, if 15% is going to funding these access processes, there's $3.3 billion that's up for... Well, let's just, all right, so we'll talk about 15% of $850 million is still millions of dollars that are up for grabs. What we know is that the assertions that are made about markets and commercial practice are rubbish to a large extent. And when those dollars are on the table, we see practices that leave people worse off. And this scheme has to be developed cognizant of the potential for that to occur, or it is negligent, in my view, because you've asked the question now, we've been asking the question all the way along. Many other people here in the room have been nodding as you've been asking the question. It seems to me that it's self-evident that this is a risk. So something has to be done at the outset, because what we don't have is the liberty, the luxury to be waiting and in 5 years' time into transition, suddenly say, well, you know what, we've spent 50, 60, 70 million dollars that's gone in this direction and isn't delivering the benefits that it should. And again, I come back to my point I made earlier. If you don't think that's a reality, you only need look as far as the vocational education and training market in this country, which has seen hundreds of millions of dollars go into the pockets of private providers in profits at a time when students, teachers and the community as a whole are being left without what was promised in that commercial arrangement. So it is a lived reality for tens of thousands of people in this country. We can't see that being allowed as a part of this very important scheme, given that we know that it's a potential.
Thanks, Kevin.
Can I respond to that? I work for a not-for-profit organisation, and I would say that the significant number of providers in New South Wales are not-for-profit, not private providers, although they are there in the space. But I don't know whether you've looked at the price guide or not, Kevin, but there's not money to be made or rorted from the system if you look at the price guide, because my organisation is charging the maximum amount for therapy hours, which is $172.17 an hour, and we make enough to get by. We don't generate a surplus. So for a private provider, entering into that arrangement I can't see that it's going. The system is not going to be flooded with people who see this as a way to make a quick buck. So I think, at the risk of sounding a bit provocative, but I think you're catastrophising something that the scheme actually won't enable.
Thanks, Trish. And one of the things we have here is the capacity to listen to diverse views. So thank you, panel. I have 3 questions booked, 1, 2 and 3. Yes, ma'am. No, lady. Oh, okay.
We're together.
Okay, good.
This is Kay, I'm Jenny. We're from Emerald. We're from the community kindy sector. Where do kindergartens fit in this early childhood, early intervention model? Currently, we're funded for inclusion, and that funding is only supplementary. Kay's Kindy expects to have a $20,000 deficit this year for funding the young students with disabilities. I expect to have a $40,000 shortfall. We're beautifully supported by ECDP in providing the intervention. We provide inclusion. There's a dysfunctional blurring between intervention and inclusion. Where will that go when NDIS comes in?
Peter, I think, did you get that? Good. Trish, do you want to start?
I'm not... I don't know how to answer it because I don't know the exact circumstance of that childcare centre, but the NDIS is not there to fund early childhood education and care. That's the responsibility of Education Queensland to a degree, and your regulatory authority, who I'm not familiar with, and CCB funding for those who are eligible for that type of funding. So the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, is meant to be funding reasonable and necessary supports for children with disability. So in regard to children accessing mainstream early childhood education and care, a child could have a package of supports that included the key worker working with that child in that childcare setting to enable the staff in that setting to ensure that child reaches the ultimate in terms of development and achieves the goals that the family have for their child. So that part of the scheme will fund that work in that inclusive setting. But the scheme won't fund a childcare centre per se, because the funding belongs to an individual. So I don't know how to answer your question, which is where will the funding come from? But I'm not sure that the scheme is the place that you should be looking for. Whether you could become an ECEI partner in a remote area, certainly as Peter pointed out, Lapston in the mountains in Sydney, Lapston Preschool has a small ECI component to its operations, and it's working as a partner. It was Access Partner, as a partner. So I can't answer it for you, but I think it's important to be clear about the intent of the scheme. It's reasonable and necessary supports for an individual child, not for a service.
Thanks, Trish. Any of the other panellists like to comment? No? Okay, I'll go to our next question over here. It's going to be interpreted.
Hi. Hi. Sorry, my name is Llewellyn. I'm a teacher's aide in the Auslan program. I just was wondering if you could talk to those children who have transitioned to NDIS, if there's been any trials there and how successful that's been, and just what's that looking like long term in terms of supporting those children, say with their language development. Is the support they're receiving, is that a one-off support or is it ongoing? Could you just talk a little bit about, just about how the NDIS is happening for children who have already transitioned over?
Okay, thank you.
My organisation is working with children who have plans, and they've transitioned from our state-based funding, and now they have a plan. So they come to us with their plan, and it has a set of goals that the families have established, because we're talking young children here mostly. And there's a package of supports. That package of supports is linked to the goals. So depending on what the dollar amount is in that package will determine how much support that child can have, so the frequency, and as negotiated with the family, where that support takes place. The plan is for 1 year, and it's reviewed before that year ends to determine what adjustments might need to be made to that plan. But it's not a one-off, and it could be that the child has that plan for a number of years and then doesn't need the ongoing supports of the scheme and exits, but they can come back at another time.
Okay.
So things are going really well. We are working with children with hearing impairment, and we're working towards the goals that the families have set for their children in whatever the settings are that family want their child to be included. We're not specialists in Auslan, so we would probably not take a child who has a plan focused on using Auslan as a key communication tool, because we don't have that skill in our team, but there are other organisations that would have those skills.
Thank you. Thanks, Trish. I have 3 questions lined up. One at the back. Does the lady know with glasses at the back there? Yes, okay. And then in the middle, yes, and then one over here.
Hi, I'm Tracy. I come from a long day care service who have used Inclusion Support Agency for many years very successfully. So going on from our Emerald colleagues, we just really want to know that when ISA stops on 30th of June, what happens? What are we going to do now? Like,
Sorry,
is it ECIA that replaces that, or the Inclusion Support Agency when it finishes? Because we now have Inclusion Support Agency facilitating 2 children at our service. What happens from there? Because, yes, but who is it? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I know that, but is the process the same now with the new IS portal and the referral and the formats, and do you know what I mean? Like all the things that we do now. Yeah.
Can I hand over to the panel? Anyone like to pick that? Thanks, Peter.
Look, probably not a satisfactory answer for you. The Inclusion Supports Program is a Commonwealth program funded, I think, by DSS. It's not part of the NDIS suite of services. I know it has just recently been, through a re-tendering process. Not 100% sure of the outcomes of that, but I know there is, probably some change. I could only encourage you to contact DSS to find out, the answers to those specific questions. Yeah.
Hang on, we won't be able to hear you without the microphone. Thank you.
It is challenging because even from a visit from the Inclusion Support Facilitator just yesterday, she can't tell us what we're going to be doing or how we're going to be going forward. So it's very hard when it ends in 20-something days.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question in the middle here. Yes, ma'am. Here.
Thanks. Good evening. My name's Debbie. I wanted to ask a question about how the NDIA will fund access partners. What's the nature of the relationship? Contractual, block funding? Do you purchase on a case-by-case basis? And also, will the access partners be required to have a regional or local focus, or are you actually looking for just a couple of statewide access partners?
Okay, yep. So the nature of the relationship will eventually be an alliance partnership, but we will have to move through a range of transition to reach that. I think we've moved on from block funding. We would probably have a contract arrangement through transition because we have to, as you saw in those numbers, bring quite a few people into the NDIS. Your question around what does that look like at full scheme? Is that just one or two statewide partners, or is it a bit more granular and a bit more local than that? We talk a lot in the agency about being able to connect, have that partner well connected in community. I think that would be very difficult for one organisation to do across a whole jurisdiction. However, what I would turn your mind to here is that the agency has deliberately taken a model of the NDIS at full scheme that is not about jurisdictions. It's about 13 regions in Australia that respect both the natural movement of people and the infrastructure and economy of those parts of Australia. So, we're deliberately wanting to sort of say, to make this a national scheme, you probably have to leave those state boundaries behind and think about this in a different construct. So that has some challenges in it. Again, I'll sort of think about what we're doing in South Australia, what we're doing in New South Wales, and what we're doing up in northern Queensland. We're working with a broad range of organisations, some quite small and local, and others with a more, probably local planning area type footprint. It's the strengths they bring to that proposition to deliver the outcomes that we're after through that partnership that is most important, not size or geographical footprint. However, having said that, I'm an advisor to the agency. I'm sure there'll be other processes to go through until that reaches, its full maturity of how that works. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Hang hang on, excuse me. Can I just go to any other panel members for... You're right, okay. I've just got questions waiting over here. The next one, thank you.
Hi, my name is Sue. I am the parent of a child with disability. I'm also part of the consumer representative working with Children's Health Queensland on the NDIS transition. Apologies, but my question's probably not really for the panel because the only Queenslander on the panel is Kevin. Who is going to show leadership around our state's transition? Because we obviously have lots of little buckets of this is the NDIS's responsibility, this is the NDIA's responsibility, this is education's responsibility, this is the union, etc. So who is going to form a roadmap for us to pull this all together for the child's actual best interest and help questions like the inclusion support one for Jenny over there and the many questions that other mainstream services may have? So who is going to show leadership and bring this together?
Who would like to field that one? Kevin, Trish. Okay.
It's an excellent question.
Good, thanks, Kevin.
And I did hear Jean talk about a stakeholder group that's going to be pulled together around some issues. So what I'll do is undertake, as a Queenslander, to raise those issues with the Minister.
Jean is talking about the stakeholder group for reviewing ECDPs,
I appreciate that.
which is one teeny tiny element of it.
No, but I'm very happy to take that up with the Minister and have
The
a
Minister
chat about...
for what?
Well, the Minister for Education in the first instance,
hang on.
No.
But have also met directly with the Minister for Communities and also with the Minister for Disability Services. So we have access across the ministerial ranks to raise those issues, and they've undertaken to continue to talk with us about them. So I'm only too happy to carry that question forward for you, and we'll see what we can do in terms of establishing some state oversight for the transition and ensure that stakeholders across the board are involved in that process.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin, but I'd like Trish and Peter Donatis to please take these messages back to the Fiona Andersons, and so apologies, Katie, for dropping you in it, back to the state-based areas to show and also to bring parents into that process as well, please.
Yes,
Thank you.
thanks.
Trish?
I can talk from a New South Wales perspective, but I can tell you what happened there that I think could happen here. And that was that the government bodies, so in New South Wales, it's called Ageing, Disability and Home Care. It's the equivalent to your Department of Communities, Child Safety and Disabilities. They took the lead. They provided substantial funding for sector development and also for parent information sessions as well. They worked closely with the NDIA, with ECIA as a peak body, and also with NDS, National Disability Services, also as a lifespan peak organisation for people with disability. And Margie could probably talk a little bit more detail about how that worked. But the government, state government, took responsibility and worked closely, collaboratively with those organisations.
Thanks, Trish.
So, and it's working quite well.
Thanks, Trish. Margie?
That's happening at both a national and state levels. So ECI nationally is working with a range of state government organisations and other peak bodies, NDS, and also children and young people with disability, the Family Advocacy National organisation and others. So I think your question is a very important one, and we are very much encourage roundtable discussions with key stakeholders in terms of the NDIS transition. We have a strong relationship with NDIA and other stakeholders. So we've offered to do anything we can here in Queensland, as we have in other chapters, to support that collaborative roundtable connectivity and discussion.
Thanks, Margie. Two questions, one with the lady in the striped top and then over here.
I've got the mic, so I'm just going to ask my question if that's okay.
Did I miss you before?
I apologise.
I thought there was only one question there. Off you go,
Sorry,
please.
thank you so much. My name's Karen. I am the parent of a little girl with autism, and a few months ago I started a petition regarding the closure of ECDPs. So firstly, I'd like to say that I'm very, very supportive of the NDIS. I'm really excited that it's coming in, but I have some concerns about what's going to happen in 2020 with the ECDPs, and a lot of people agree with me. So my question's actually for Peter and for Jean, if it's okay. I know she's not sitting up there on the panel, but I'm happy to have representatives from the NDIA and from the Department of Education in the same room. And my question is, a few weeks ago, myself and some other parents met with the Minister for Education and some other representatives from the department, and Kate Jones indicated that she would like to look into the possibility of ECDPs becoming service providers or access partners. So, Jean, I wanted to ask, has anything been taken forward with that? And also, Peter, is that something that can even happen?
Thanks very much. I think if you want to direct the question to Jean, that email address I gave you would be the best one, but I'll go to Peter first. Have we got an answer to that?
Very short answer, yes. I mean, that's totally up to each jurisdiction as to the role that they may want to play in the NDIS at full scheme. You know, I can't give advice to Queensland Government one way or another. It's totally up to them as to how they might take that forward. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. And what I heard Jean say, and I'm not going to put words in her mouth, but the review's going to be there, and I think that for me as an individual, with or without a disability, but passionate about kids and early intervention as in a previous life, if there is a review, make sure that all the peak bodies and the individuals have a chance to input in that review, and that's your responsibility. But use that email address to contact Jean direct. Madam, thank you for the question.
Hi, my name is Kerry. The question is, will there be a requirement or only an expectation in Queensland, I'm guessing, and I'm asking it, I guess, already assuming you've considered this in other states, for there to be teachers and therapists working alongside each other, not one or the other, especially in preparation for the transition to school. And with the concern that Bronwyn shared about the bigger organisations having a range of therapists, there are several organisations that have a range of therapists but with no early childhood educators. And so I think, yeah, my question is basically, is it an expectation that there should be teachers as well as therapists, or is it a requirement?
Okay. Perhaps that's an open question, Trish, around what's happening in your trials.
So, at the National Council meeting recently, talking with colleagues from South Australia, I was really gobsmacked to learn that they don't employ teachers in some of their services in South Australia. I just stared at this person like, what? Then how does that work? So that really surprised me. But I'm a teacher. I've worked in early childhood intervention for 15 years. I am now a senior manager. I employ teachers, speechies, OTs, physios, psychologists. The team would not be complete without a teacher, just as it wouldn't be complete without a speechie or an OT or a physio or a psychologist or social worker. So they're an integral part of the service system. The teacher and, okay, I'm talking myself up here, but teachers have a really wonderful talent of looking at the whole child really easily. I'm not suggesting that therapists can't do that, but they have specialty areas that they really need to focus on. But a teacher can bring it all together. So teachers have a very vital role to play in early childhood intervention in Queensland.
Thanks, Trish. Go over here, the lady in blue. Microphone down the front. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Belinda. I'm a parent of a child with disability with hearing impairment. So I'm a little bit confused because you clearly stated education is not covered by NDIS. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. and yet teachers are educators. You've just spoken about teachers being included in the plan, but they're not included in NDIS. ECDPs are education facilities, preschool. Why are they included in NDIS when NDIS doesn't cover education? Is that not a conflict within itself?
Maybe I didn't explain myself well enough, and I'm sorry for that. But educators are part of an early childhood intervention team that work from a base and go and work with children in the settings in which they spend their time. So they're not the teachers that are running a classroom in ECDP or in a preschool or long day care. These are special educators who are working with their allied health colleagues to help the family achieve the goals. So they work in a family's home. They may work with the child in a childcare setting. They may be supporting a child to participate in a social activity. It really depends on what the goals are and what the functional needs are of the child, but the teachers are part of that specialist team that work with the family to provide the supports for the child to meet those outcomes. So that's not funding education, it's purchase, the teacher is part of the team, but not ECDP or...
If it's an education question, you've got the email address, but you'd like a point of clarification?
So to clarify then, are teachers service providers?
So my organisation is a service provider and we employ teachers as staff to provide services they're key workers. So we work under a key worker model where there is one worker who works with the family. We try to choose the key worker that matches best the goals that family has for that child. So a key worker could be a teacher, or it could be speech or OT, etc.
Thank you.
So the teacher is part of the team.
You're right, Trish, thank you. Okay, we have time for 2 more questions and I've got them nailed already. Thanks. 1, 2. Yes?
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Philippa and I'm a parent of 3 children, 3 deaf children. And so I have a huge concern, and I totally understand, I can hear what you're saying, that NDIS is doesn't look after education. But the problem I have is education is one of the most important things. So for our children to have a life of full potential, we start with education, and we were talking about that before. It starts with education, we go on to employment. And ECDPs provide that. And I know that you're saying, send the email to Jean, pass it on. But my problem is that what we have heard, what parents, a lot of us have heard, is that Education Queensland is putting it on to you, to NDIA. Go to NDIA, go to the website, ask NDIA, it's NDIS, there's a question for NDIS, NDIA. So we're confused here. What do we do? And then NDIA, NDIS saying go to Education Queensland because that's what you're talking about, education. So we're going here to there. Who do we talk to? Who's going to give us the answers? Because at the moment we are not getting any answers.
Okay, thank you for that.
I have lots more I could say, but...
That will be our last question because it's time, but I'd like to refer to the panel for a comment on this issue that seems to have some element of support in the room. Is there anyone that would like to tackle this issue?
Yes, well, first of all, apologies that's the very non-credible response you're getting, because that's not fair, and nor is that helpful for what you're trying to achieve for your children. So look, I will take this back with me with Education Queensland to make sure that we get that type of advice very, very clear about what you should expect from each system. So I can only say that at times the message may be confused because the way this is forming is not always totally clear, but there are very clear interface principles about reasonable adjustment and inclusion of children with hearing impairment or hearing loss in education. And what the NDIS should fund is the reasonable and necessary supports to make sure that a child who has hearing loss or is deaf reaches a certain level of communication and language, through the reasonable and necessary supports. So, I will definitely take this message back because that is not a credible response.
Thanks, Peter. Ladies, we need to call it because we need to get out of the room, sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join with me in thanking our panellists this evening. Thank you. Thank you. If I was to make a summative statement, ladies and gentlemen, what I'd go to a short number of things. Both Jean and Kevin acknowledge the work of those who have worked in disability in the past, and let's not acknowledge them. And then Peter spoke about our capacity or our need to water, nurture, feed and grow this new innovation in our community. Personally, I believe in being a values-driven organisation, and I've listened to our speakers this evening and I've come up with a short list of values, and I think these values, whether they're the ones I share with you this evening or the ones that you come up with in your own journey on the NDIS journey, are the value of service, ultimate service to the children who sometimes don't have a voice. The value of participation and real participation with all the players, including those players who do not have a voice themselves for some reason or another. Some people don't know what they don't know around encouraging and gifting to their child with a disability. So it's about full participation. It's about absolute commitment. And if we do not have, ladies and gentlemen, the value of love in what we do, then we're in the wrong business. And overarching all these values and any others that you bring to this agenda must be the value of integrity. And integrity is the harmony, the evidence of our other values in what we say and in what we do. So, thank you very much. I'm going to introduce Katie, who's going to say a few words to finish up with. Please join with me in welcoming Katie.
Thank you, thank you. I'll be very quick, I promise. So I'm the president of the Queensland ECIA chapter, and we've all gathered here tonight because of our passion and commitment to the best possible outcomes for young children with disabilities and developmental delays. We all agree that early childhood intervention is vital for our children and their families. What we may not agree with is what it looks like. ECIA Queensland wanted to present this forum to provide the latest information, to give our community the chance to ask the questions to the relevant stakeholders in a clear and transparent way. Change is imminent as we transition to a national disability insurance scheme, and whilst we welcome the opportunities this creates for families, we are mindful of the quality programs that are currently achieving positive outcomes in Queensland. ECIA Queensland is a not-for-profit organisation that is run solely by volunteers working in the sector. We are committed to continuing to provide our community with the latest information, to asking questions of the stakeholders and to advocating for our members. Sue, I take your question. We do want to take the lead in this transition, but we require funding. That funding needs to come from bigger organisations, government organisations. For example, tonight was presented wholly and solely on our little ECIA Queensland funds with no support from any stakeholders. On behalf of ECIA Queensland, I'd like to thank each of the speakers, Trish Hanna, Peter Donatris, Jean Smith and Kevin Bates. We appreciate the information you have shared and your ongoing commitment to ensuring that the transition to NDIS is as smooth as possible in Queensland for the Queensland children, the families and professionals. To our wonderful facilitator, Mark Hunter, there's a lot of passion in the room tonight, and we would really like to thank you for keeping us on time and on task.
Thank you.
And thank you to you, the audience. We appreciate the logistical challenges that some of you would have had to go through and negotiate to be here tonight. It is our hope that you leave here tonight feeling a little clearer, with a greater understanding of the changes, the challenges and the opportunities ahead. To keep up to date and show your support for early childhood intervention in Queensland, you can become a member of ECIAQ. There are membership forms available at the door or on our webpage. Our webpage is on those pens that you've all been gifted tonight. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And please do not hesitate to contact us with any questions and queries that you may have from tonight's forum. Thank you for coming.